A wealthy businessman found a boy identical to his deceased son, crying alone in Central Park. When he approached the child, what he discovered left him paralyzed with shock. The connection between them would uncover painful secrets from the past that neither was prepared to face. What happened next was even more devastating. Leave a like to keep following our upcoming videos, and don't forget to subscribe to receive more incredible stories like this one. The rain pounded mercilessly against the windshield of Michael Johnson's Mercedes as he drove aimlessly through the streets of New York. The weather matched his mood, dark and turbulent. Even after 5 years, the pain of losing his son Matthew hadn't subsided. If anything, it had grown deeper, more consuming with each passing day. Michael loosened his tie, a habitual gesture that did nothing to ease the tightness in his chest. The corner office at Johnson Enterprises, the company he'd built from nothing, felt more like a prison these days than a symbol of success. Every morning he'd stare at the family photo on his desk. Himself, Matthew and Sarah, his ex-wife who'd left shortly after their son's death, unable to bear the weight of their shared grief. Today marked Matthew's birthday. He would have been 15. The thought sent another wave of pain through Michael's chest as he turned into Central Park West, barely noticing where he was going. The rain had cleared most people from the streets, leaving an eerie emptiness that seemed to echo his own isolation. That's when he saw him. A small figure huddled under a large oak tree, completely drenched by the rain. Something about the boy's posture, the way he held himself, knees drawn up to his chest, made Michael slow down. He pulled over to the curb, squinting through the rain-streaked window. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, wearing clothes that were clearly too thin for the weather. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He should drive away. This wasn't his problem. New York was full of troubled kids, and he couldn't save them all. But something kept him there, watching. The boy lifted his head, and Michael's heart stopped. The face that looked out at the rain could have been Matthew's. The same dark hair, the same jawline that Michael had memorized in countless photographs. Even from this distance, he could see the same vulnerability in the boy's expression that he'd seen in his son's face so many times. Before he could think better of it, Michael was opening his car door. The cold rain immediately soaked through his expensive suit, but he barely noticed. His feet carried him toward the tree, toward the boy who looked so achingly familiar. It hurt. "Hey!" Michael called out softly, not wanting to frighten him. "Are you okay?" The boy's head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation. Up close, the resemblance to Matthew was even more striking, though there were differences too. This boy's eyes were brown instead of blue, and there was a small scar above his right eyebrow. "I'm fine," the boy mumbled, though his shivering betrayed the lie, just waiting for the rain to stop. Michael knew he should call the police or child services. That would be the responsible thing to do. Instead, he found himself saying, "There's a diner just around the corner. How about we get you something warm to drink?" The boy studied him warily, and Michael could see the internal debate playing out on his face. The ingrained warning about strangers warring with desperate hunger and cold. "I'm Michael," he added, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "I promise, just something to warm you up, then you can go wherever you need to go." After what seemed like an eternity, the boy nodded slowly. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice barely audible above the rain. As they walked to the diner, Michael kept a careful distance, conscious of how this might look to passers-by, a well-dressed businessman and a soaking wet child. The neon lights of Jerry's diner beckoned through the gloom, promising warmth and shelter from the storm. Inside, the waitress raised an eyebrow at their bedraggled appearance, but led them to a booth without comment. Ethan slid into the vinyl seat, leaving a trail of water on the floor. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting, Michael could see how thin he was, how his clothes hung loose on his small frame. "Hot chocolate?" Michael suggested, and Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. They sat in silence while waiting for their drinks, Michael fighting the urge to bombard the boy with questions. Where were his parents? Why was he alone in the rain? but he knew from experience how fragile trust could be, how easily it could shatter if pushed too hard too fast. The waitress returned with their drinks, hot chocolate for Ethan, black coffee for Michael. She set down a plate of fries without being asked, giving Michael a knowing look before walking away. Ethan stared at the food, as if afraid it might disappear, his hands wrapped tightly around the warm mug. "Go ahead," Michael encouraged softly. "It's okay." As he watched the boy eat, Michael felt an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his usual grief. This child, who looked so much like Matthew, was clearly in trouble, and despite all his wealth and success, Michael had never felt more helpless. What he didn't know was that this chance encounter in the rain would set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets and force both him and Ethan to confront painful truths they weren't prepared to face. The diner had grown quiet as the evening crowd thinned out. Ethan had finished the fries and was now stirring what remained of his hot chocolate, his eyes occasionally darting toward the door as if planning an escape route. Michael watched him, trying to ignore the way his heart clenched every time the boy made a gesture that reminded him of Matthew. "Do you want to tell me why you were really out in the rain?" Michael asked gently, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Ethan's shoulders tensed, but he didn't look up. "I ran away," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "from Hope's Haven Children's Home." The name was familiar. Michael had made donations to the facility before. It was one of several orphanages his company supported as part of their community outreach program. He'd never visited personally, always sending his assistant to handle such matters. The pain of seeing children without families had been too raw. "How long have you been there?" Michael asked, keeping his tone neutral. 3 years, 2 months and 14 days. Ethan replied, with a precision that spoke volumes about how he'd counted every day. "Since my mom," he trailed off, his fingers tightening around the mug. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," Michael assured him quickly. Ethan nodded gratefully, then looked up at Michael with an intensity that startled him. "Why did you help me? Most people just walk by." The question caught Michael off guard. He couldn't tell this child the real reason. That he looked so much like his dead son, it physically hurt. "Because no one should be alone in the rain," he said instead. Something in Ethan's expression suggested he knew there was more to it, but he didn't press. Instead, he asked, "Do you have kids?" The question hit Michael like a physical blow. He took a long sip of his now cold coffee before answering. "I had a son, Matthew." "Had?" Ethan's voice was soft, understanding in a way no child his age should be. "He died 5 years ago. Car accident." The words came out automatically, the way they always did when Michael was forced to explain his loss. What he didn't say was how the accident had destroyed everything: his marriage, his faith, his ability to feel anything but a crushing emptiness. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. And unlike the hollow sympathy Michael usually received, these words carried the weight of someone who truly understood loss. The waitress approached their table again, refilling Michael's coffee without asking. "We're closing in 15 minutes, she informed them kindly but firmly. Reality crashed back in. Michael would have to call the authorities. He couldn't leave Ethan on the streets, and the orphanage would be looking for him. But the thought of sending him back to an institution made something inside him rebel. "I should go," Ethan said quickly, starting to slide out of the booth. "Wait," Michael found himself saying. "Let me at least drive you back. It's still raining." Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly. As they walked back to Michael's car, the boy suddenly stopped. Can we just drive for a little while first? I'm not ready to go back yet." Michael knew he shouldn't. It was late, and this was completely inappropriate, but the pleading look in Ethan's eyes broke down his resistance. "Just for a little while," he agreed. They drove in silence through the wet streets of Manhattan, the city lights reflecting off the puddles like scattered stars. Michael noticed how Ethan seemed to drink in every detail of the expensive car's interior. his fingers occasionally brushing against the leather seats as if to confirm they were real. Ms. Davis says I'm too old now, Ethan said suddenly, his voice small in the quiet car. Most people want babies or really little kids. Nobody wants a 10-year-old with problems. Problems? Michael prompted carefully. I have nightmares sometimes about the accident, and I get angry sometimes when the other kids talk about their families coming to visit. Ethan's words tumbled out as if he'd been holding them back for too long. And I remember things I'm not supposed to remember. About before. Something in the way he said it made Michael's instincts prickle. What kind of things? But Ethan had already retreated back into silence, staring out the window at the passing city. Michael was about to change direction, head toward Hope's Haven, when Ethan spoke again. Do you believe in second chances, Mr. Johnson? The question, so adult and yet so childlike in its hopefulness, caught Michael off guard. Before he could answer, his phone rang, the sound sharp and intrusive in the quiet car. The name on the screen made his blood run cold. Sarah. His ex-wife never called, especially not on this day. Something must be wrong, very wrong. As Michael reached for the phone, he didn't notice how Ethan had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on the name displayed on the car's dashboard screen. Nor did he see the flash of recognition that crossed the boy's face, followed by something that looked almost like fear. Michael's hand hovered over the phone for a moment before he answered. Sarah? His voice was tense, guarded. Michael. His ex-wife's voice cracked slightly. I went to the cemetery today. There was someone there. A woman. Michael frowned, glancing briefly at Ethan, who was still eerily still beside him. What do you mean? She was standing at Matthew's grave, Michael. When she saw me, she ran, but she left something, a photograph. Sarah's voice trembled. It's from the day of the accident, but it's impossible. We never took any pictures that day. Michael pulled the car over to the curb, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. What was in the picture? Matthew getting into your car. But there's something else. Something I don't understand. Sarah paused, and Michael could hear her taking a shaky breath. There's another child in the background, a boy who looks just like him. Michael's eyes snapped to Ethan, who was now staring intently at his own hands, his shoulders hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller. Sarah, I need to call you back, Michael said abruptly, and ended the call before she could protest. The silence in the car was deafening. Rain continued to drum against the roof, but neither of them spoke for what felt like an eternity. Ethan, Michael finally said, his voice carefully controlled, is there something you need to tell me? The boy's lower lip trembled slightly. I can't, he whispered. She said I can't. Who said? Michael pressed gently, though his heart was racing. Miss Davis, and the other woman, the one who comes sometimes. Ethan's voice got even quieter. She looks sad, like you. She brings me things sometimes, but I'm not supposed to tell anyone. Michael felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. This woman, what does she look like? Ethan shook his head violently. I promised, if I tell, they'll send me away again, like before. No one is going to send you away, Michael assured him, though he had no right to make such a promise. Please, Ethan, I need to know. Tears were now rolling down Ethan's cheeks. She has long brown hair, like in the picture on your desk. I saw it when you were showing me your phone. That's her, isn't it? The woman who left you? Michael felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the car. Sarah had been visiting Ethan at the orphanage? Why? And why hadn't she told him? How long has she been coming to see you? Since I got there. But she said... Ethan's voice broke. She said I couldn't tell anyone because it would hurt people. Important people. She brings me books sometimes and tells me stories about him, the other boy, the one who died. Michael's mind was spinning. None of this made sense. Why would Sarah secretly visit an orphan who looked like their dead son? Unless... Ethan, what's your mother's name? The boy's face crumpled. I don't remember much about her. just that she used to cry a lot, and she kept saying she was sorry. The night of the accident, she kept saying she was sorry. The accident. Michael's voice was barely audible. The car came out of nowhere. Mom tried to swerve, but Ethan's words were coming faster now, tumbling out as if a dam had broken. I remember the lights and the crash and someone screaming. Then I woke up in the hospital, and they said Mom was gone, and I couldn't stay where I was anymore. They brought me to New York, to Hope's Haven. Michael's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone again, scrolling through old emails until he found what he was looking for. The police report from the night Matthew died. The report he'd read so many times, the words were burned into his memory. But this time, he noticed something he'd overlooked before. In the section about the other vehicle involved in the collision, there was a note. Second passenger, minor, transported to St. Mary's Hospital. Status, stable. Ethan, Michael said, his voice rough with emotion, what was your mother's name? The boy looked up at him, his brown eyes swimming with tears. Claire, he whispered. Claire Bennett. The name hit Michael like a physical blow. Claire Bennett. The woman who had worked as Sarah's assistant 5 years ago. The woman who had disappeared shortly before the accident, leaving only a cryptic resignation letter. But before Michael could process this revelation, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the words made his blood run cold. Stay away from the boy, Michael. Some secret should stay buried, or next time it won't be just a photograph I leave at your son's grave. Michael stared at the threatening message until the screen went dark. His mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Beside him, Ethan had grown unnaturally quiet, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere. We can't go back to Hope's Haven, Michael said finally, making a decision. Not tonight. But Ms. Davis, Ethan started. I'll handle Ms. Davis. Michael started the car again, his movements deliberate and controlled despite the trembling in his hands. Right now, we need somewhere safe. He drove through the rain-slicked streets, occasionally checking his rear-view mirror for any signs of being followed. His penthouse wasn't an option. It would be the first place Sarah would look. Instead, he headed toward the outskirts of the city, where he kept a small apartment under a different name. It was his refuge when the memories in his regular home became too overwhelming. Are you in trouble because of me? Ethan's small voice broke through Michael's thoughts. No, Michael assured him, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. I'm trying to figure something out. About your mother, and about Sarah, the woman who visits you. She made me promise not to tell anyone about her visits, Ethan said, wringing his hands. She said it would hurt you if you knew. Hurt me? Why would it hurt me? Ethan's next words came out in a rush. Because of what happened that night, the night of the accident. She said it was all tangled up, and if people knew the truth, bad things would happen. Michael pulled into the underground parking garage of the apartment building, his mind working overtime. What truth, Ethan? What do you remember about that night? The boy's face scrunched up in concentration. It's all mixed up. Sometimes I dream about it, but I can't tell what's real anymore. There were 2 cars. Mom was crying. She kept saying she had to fix something, had to make it right. Then the other car came and... He broke off, shuddering. Michael parked the car and turned to face Ethan fully. Listen to me. Whatever happened that night, whatever secrets people are keeping, none of it is your fault. Do you understand? Ethan nodded, but his eyes were distant. Sometimes I remember another boy, in the other car. He looked just like me. I thought it was just a dream, but then Sarah showed me his picture. And Michael's phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Last warning, Michael. Take him back now, or everyone will know what really happened that night. As Michael led Ethan up to the apartment, his mind kept returning to Claire Bennett. She had worked closely with Sarah for 2 years before her sudden disappearance. Michael had never paid much attention to her. She was just another employee. But now, thinking back, He remembered how Sarah had reacted to her resignation. She'd been upset, more than seemed appropriate for losing an assistant. Inside the apartment, Michael quickly checked all the rooms and windows while Ethan stood in the living room, taking in the sparse furnishings with curious eyes. "You can take the bedroom," Michael told him. "There are some clothes in the dresser that might fit you, things I kept from—" He couldn't finish the sentence. While Ethan changed, Michael sat at the kitchen counter and pulled out his laptop. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He started searching news archives from 5 years ago, looking for anything about Claire Bennett or the accident. The first few searches yielded nothing unusual, but then he found something. A small article from a local paper near where the accident had occurred. Local woman missing after fatal collision. The article mentioned Claire Bennett as a witness to the accident, not a victim. But according to Ethan, she had been driving one of the cars. Michael's phone rang again. "Sarah." "Where are you?" she demanded as soon as he answered. "I went to your apartment. You need to see this photograph, Michael. There's something wrong about it. Something impossible." "Sarah," Michael cut her off. "Did you know about Ethan?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Did you know that Claire Bennett had a son?" Michael pressed. "A son who looks exactly like Matthew. How did you—" Sarah's voice shook. "Where is he? Is he with you? Why have you been visiting him at the orphanage? What aren't you telling me? Michael, listen to me. You don't understand what's happening. Claire, she knew things. Things about that night that could destroy everything. We had an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. But before Sarah could answer, there was a crash from the bedroom. Michael dropped the phone and ran to check on Ethan. The boy was standing by the window, pale as a ghost, pointing at something outside. "She's here," he whispered. "The woman who leaves the messages. She found us." Michael rushed to the window, pulling Ethan away from it in one swift motion. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could make out a figure standing under a streetlight, a woman in a dark coat, her face obscured by an umbrella. As he watched, she lowered the umbrella slightly, revealing features that made his heart stop. "That's impossible," he whispered. The woman was Claire Bennett, but not as she had appeared 5 years ago. Her face was scarred on one side, her once dark hair now streaked with grey. Even from this distance he could see the intensity of her gaze fixed on their window. "She's been following me," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "Ever since Sarah started visiting. She leaves notes at the orphanage, but Miss Davis always takes them away before I can read them." Michael's phone was still on the floor where he'd dropped it, Sarah's voice faintly calling his name. He picked it up, his eyes never leaving the window. "She's alive, Sarah," he said into the phone. "Claire Bennett is alive, and she's standing outside my building right now." "No," Sarah's voice cracked. "That's not possible. She died in the accident. I saw the report." "Like you saw the report about Ethan?" Michael's voice was sharp. "What else have you been hiding from me?" "You don't understand," Sarah pleaded. "After what happened with Matthew, when I found out about Ethan, about Claire's connection to everything, I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" But Sarah had gone quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was different, scared. "Don't let her take him, Michael. Whatever you do, don't let Claire take Ethan. She's not well." Outside, Claire had started walking toward the building's entrance. Michael quickly moved away from the window, his mind racing. "Ethan," he said, turning to the boy who was huddled in the corner, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about your mother. Not just the accident. Everything." Ethan wrapped his arms around himself, a gesture so reminiscent of Matthew that it made Michael's chest ache. "She used to work in an office. She had a friend there, Sarah. They would whisper sometimes when they thought I couldn't hear, about secrets and something they had to fix." "What kind of secrets?" "I don't know exactly, but Mom would cry sometimes, looking at pictures on her computer, pictures of another family. Your family." Ethan's voice got very small. "The night of the accident, she said she couldn't keep lying anymore, that she had to make things right." A sharp knock at the apartment door made them both jump. Michael moved instinctively to stand between Ethan and the door. "Michael!" Claire's voice came through the door, different from how he remembered. Rougher, desperate. "I know you're in there. Let me see my son." "Your son?" Michael called back, his hand reaching for his phone to call security. "The son you abandoned? The son you let everyone believe was dead? You don't understand." Claire's voice cracked. "Sarah's been lying to you, to all of us, about that night, about the boys, about everything." Michael's finger hovered over the emergency call button. "What about the boys?" "Let me in," Claire pleaded. "I'll explain everything. About the project Sarah was running, about why our sons look so alike, about what really happened the night Matthew died." Michael felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "The project? What project?" But instead of answering, Claire started laughing. A broken, terrible sound. "Ask your wife about Project Mirror, Michael. Ask her why she needed my son. Ask her why she's been visiting him all these years, making sure he stayed hidden." Behind Michael, Ethan had gone completely still. "Mom?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Ethan, baby, please." Claire's voice softened. "Tell him about the tests Sarah used to run. Tell him about the other children." Michael turned to Ethan, whose face had gone ghostly pale. "What tests?" I'm not supposed to remember," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "Sarah said I'm not supposed to remember the hospital or the other kids who looked like me. She said it was all just bad dreams." The sound of police sirens in the distance made Claire curse. "They're coming. Sarah must have called them. Michael, please, you have to listen to me. Check your company's records from 5 years ago. Look for Project Mirror. Look for what your wife was really doing in that research division." Michael's phone buzzed with another message. This one was from Sarah. "Don't listen to her. She's delusional. I'm almost there. Just keep Ethan safe." But something in Michael's gut told him they weren't safe. Not from Claire, not from Sarah, and maybe not even from the truth that was starting to emerge from the shadows of the past. Through the door, he could hear Claire's footsteps retreating rapidly. The sirens were getting closer, and Ethan was staring at him with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much pain for a 10-year-old boy. "The pictures," Ethan said suddenly, "in my mum's computer, they weren't just of your family. They were of all of us, all the boys who looked the same. Sarah called us her mirrors." The police sirens grew closer, then stopped abruptly outside the building. Michael quickly guided Ethan away from the window and into the small study adjacent to the living room. His mind was reeling from the revelations, but he knew he had to stay focused. "Stay here," he told Ethan. "Don't make a sound until I come get you." The boy nodded, his eyes wide with fear and something else, a kind of resigned understanding that no child should possess. Just as Michael turned to leave, Ethan grabbed his sleeve. "In my backpack," he whispered. "The one I left at the orphanage. There's a notebook. Mum gave it to me before everything. She said if anything happened to her, I should show it to you." Michael's response was cut short by a sharp knock at the apartment door. "NYPD, open up." He squeezed Ethan's shoulder reassuringly before closing the study door and walking to the entrance. Through the peephole, he could see 2 officers, and behind them, Sarah. His ex-wife looked different than she had the last time he'd seen her. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her face pale with fear or anxiety. When he opened the door, she pushed past the officers before they could speak. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where's Ethan?" "Mrs. Johnson," one of the officers interrupted. "You reported a woman threatening a child." "Yes," Sarah said quickly. "Claire Bennett. She's mentally unstable, and she's been stalking this child. She's dangerous." The officers took statements, but Michael barely heard the questions he was answering. His attention was fixed on Sarah, who kept glancing around the apartment as if expecting Claire to materialize from the shadows. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the officers left to search the building and surrounding area. As soon as the door closed, Sarah rounded on Michael. "You have to let me explain," she began. "Explain what?" Michael's voice was deadly quiet. Explain why you've been secretly visiting a boy who looks exactly like our son. Explain what Claire meant about Project Mirror. Or maybe explain why our son's death report has inconsistencies that you never mentioned. Sarah sank onto the couch, her composure cracking. I was trying to protect everyone. You have to understand. What we were doing, it wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. The research was groundbreaking. We were going to help so many families. What research, Sarah? What did you do? It started as a genetic study, she said, her voice hollow. At the university before I met you, we were looking at ways to help parents who'd lost children. Claire was one of our research assistants. She volunteered her son for the initial tests. Michael felt sick. Tests? What kind of tests? Nothing invasive, Sarah said quickly. Just blood work, cognitive studies. But then we discovered something unexpected. Something about how grief affects parental recognition patterns. We thought we could help parents heal by introducing them to children who matched their lost ones. Not to replace them, but to help with the transition. You were matching orphans with grieving parents based on appearances. Michael's voice rose with incredulity. That's insane. It wasn't like that, Sarah protested. The similarities between Ethan and Matthew, they weren't just physical. The behavioral patterns, the cognitive responses, it was like they were mirrors of each other. We thought we could use that, help both the children and the parents. So, what went wrong? Michael asked, though he dreaded the answer. Sarah's face crumpled. Claire found out the full scope of the project. She discovered that some of the other researchers were taking it further, looking for ways to enhance the similarities, make the matches more perfect. She threatened to expose everything. And then our son died in a car accident. Michael finished, the pieces starting to fall into place. The same night Claire supposedly died. Only she didn't die, did she? She survived, and you've been keeping her away from Ethan ever since. You don't understand, Sarah pleaded. If the truth came out about the project, about what happened that night, everything would fall apart. People's lives would be destroyed. People's lives were destroyed, Sarah. A boy lost his mother, was forced to grow up in an orphanage while you what? Watched from a distance? Made sure he stayed quiet about what he remembered? Sarah stood up, her face hardening. Where is he, Michael? I need to take him back to Hope's Haven before Claire does something desperate. No, the voice came from the study doorway. Ethan stood there, his small frame somehow looking stronger than Michael had seen him yet. I remember everything now, about the hospital, about the tests, about the night of the accident. Mom wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was trying to save me. From you. Sarah took a step toward him, but Ethan backed away. Ethan, honey, you're confused. The accident traumatized you. Those memories aren't real. Then explain this, Ethan said, pulling something from his pocket, a folded photograph worn at the edges. Mom gave me this the night everything happened. She said it was proof. Michael took the photo with trembling hands. It showed a laboratory, sterile and white. In the background, through a window, he could see Sarah in a lab coat, watching as several children, all eerily similar in appearance, sat at desks, performing what looked like tests. And in the corner of the photo, partially visible but unmistakable, was a date stamp, 2 weeks after Matthew's death. Sarah's face had gone completely white as she stared at the photograph in Michael's hands. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of sirens and the steady drum of rain against the windows. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she finally whispered, sinking back onto the couch. The project was meant to help people. You have to understand, after Matthew died, seeing how destroyed you were, I thought if we could perfect the process, we could prevent other parents from going through that pain. What process? Michael's voice was hollow. What did you do to these children? Sarah ran her hands through her hair, a gesture of frustration he remembered from their marriage. It started small, just observations, noting the natural similarities between certain children. But then we discovered that with the right environmental conditions, careful psychological programming, we could enhance those similarities, make them more perfect. You were programming children to replace dead ones? The disgust in Michael's voice was palpable. No, Sarah protested. We were helping them. These were orphans, children no one wanted. We gave them purpose, gave them families who would love them because they reminded them of their lost children. It was beautiful, in its way. Beautiful. Ethan's voice shook with anger. You kept us in that place for weeks, made us learn things about the dead kids we were supposed to replace, made us practice acting like them. Michael felt sick. How many children, Sarah? 12 initially, she admitted. All boys between 8 and 10, all with similar features to children who had been lost. The similarities were remarkable, almost like nature had created its own backup system. We just enhanced it. And Matthew? Michael could barely form the words. Was he part of your experiment too? Sarah's face crumpled. No, God no. Matthew was perfect just as he was. He was my control subject, the baseline we used to measure the others against. But Claire, she started asking too many questions, started noticing things about the funding, about where some of the children came from. They weren't all orphans, were they? Michael's detective mind was putting the pieces together. Some of them had families who were told their children died in accidents, just like Claire was supposed to have died. Sarah didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. The night of the accident, Ethan said, his voice stronger now. Mom was taking me away. She found out what was really happening to the kids who didn't match well enough. She tried to warn the other parents, but what? Michael prompted gently. The ones who failed the final evaluations, Sarah interrupted, her voice dead. They were supposed to be relocated, given new families far away. It was meant to be a fresh start. That's not what happened, Ethan said. Tell him what really happened to them, Sarah. Tell him about the special program for the ones who didn't work out. Michael looked between them, a horrible understanding dawning. Sarah, what did you do? I didn't do anything, she shouted, jumping to her feet. It was the board. They said we couldn't risk the children talking, revealing the program. They had to protect their investment. I tried to stop it, but by then it was too late. They had too much power, too much control. And Matthew? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Was his accident really an accident? Sarah's face went through a series of emotions. Fear, guilt, desperation. He wasn't supposed to be in the car that night. He was supposed to be with me at the lab, but he left early, wanted to go home with you. If he had just stayed. Oh my God, Michael felt the room spinning. You knew Claire was taking Ethan away that night. You knew she was going to expose everything, so I was trying to stop her. Sarah's composure finally shattered. I sent security to intercept her car. They were just supposed to force her off the road, take Ethan back to the facility. But Matthew, your car wasn't supposed to be there. It was an accident, a terrible accident. Ethan had gone very still. You killed my mother, he said quietly. You killed her because she tried to save us, and you killed Matthew too. No, you don't understand. Sarah was becoming hysterical now. Everything I did for science, for progress. Those children would have grown up in orphanages, unwanted. Instead, we gave them purpose. We made them special. A new voice cut through the tension. Special? Is that what you call what you did to us? They all turned to see Claire standing in the doorway, her scarred face wet with rain or tears. Behind her stood 2 police officers, their expressions grim as they took in the scene. Miss Bennett, one of the officers said, would you like to make your statement now? Claire's eyes never left Sarah's face. Yes, I would. About Project Mirror, about the children who disappeared, and about what really happened the night Sarah Johnson had her own son killed to protect her secrets. Sarah screamed, a sound of pure desperation, and lunged for her purse. But before she could reach inside, Michael caught her wrist, watching as a small revolver fell from her bag and clattered to the floor. Time seemed to freeze as everyone stared at the gun on the floor. One of the officers quickly moved to secure it, while his partner handcuffed Sarah, who had gone eerily quiet. The only sound in the room was her soft, irregular breathing. "Mrs. Johnson." The officer began reading her rights, but Sarah wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan, who had moved to stand beside Claire. "I did it for you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All of it. After Matthew died, seeing you destroy yourself with grief, I thought if I could perfect the process, find the perfect match, you would heal. You would be happy again." Michael felt physically ill. "You experimented on children, Sarah. You let our son die to protect your twisted project. How could you think any of this would make me happy?" "Because it was working." Sarah's voice rose hysterically. "Look at him. Look at Ethan. The similarities, the mannerisms. They're perfect. I monitored your interaction with him tonight. The way you connected, how natural it felt. That's what we achieved with Project Mirror. We created perfect matches." "They're children," Claire said quietly, her scarred face tight with anger. "Not mirrors, not replacements. Children with their own lives, their own souls. What you did to them, what you're still doing to them, it's monstrous." The second officer had pulled out a notepad. "Miss Bennett, you mentioned other children. How many are we talking about?" Claire's hand tightened on Ethan's shoulder. "There were 12 in my group, but there were other groups, other facilities. The project had been running for years before I discovered what was really happening. The ones who didn't match well enough, they disappeared. Officially, they were relocated to other programs, but we'll need names, locations," the officer said. "Everything you can remember." "I have more than memories." Claire reached into her coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've spent the last 5 years gathering evidence, bank records, facility locations, medical files, the names of everyone involved, from the researchers to the board members who funded it." Sarah lunged forward despite her handcuffs, nearly knocking over the officer holding her. "You can't! Do you know what they'll do? How many people will be hurt?" "People have already been hurt," Michael said, his voice hard. "Children have died, Sarah. Our son died." "No!" Sarah's composure completely shattered. "Matthew wasn't supposed to die. I loved him. I needed him for the baseline tests, to perfect the matches. If he had stayed at the lab that night like he was supposed to. You kept him late at the lab for tests." Michael felt rage building inside him. "All those nights you said you were taking him to soccer practice or study groups?" "He was helping other children," Sarah insisted. "His data was crucial to the project. The way he moved, spoke, thought. We needed to record everything to create perfect mirrors. It was all for science, for progress." Ethan stepped forward, his young face showing a maturity far beyond his years. "Tell them about the training room, Sarah. About how you made us watch videos of the dead children for hours, made us learn to copy their movements, their voices. Tell them about the punishments when we didn't get it right." The officers exchanged glances, and the one holding Sarah's arm tightened his grip. "Mrs. Johnson, you'll need to come with us. We have some serious questions about these allegations. You don't understand." Sarah's voice had taken on a pleading quality. "The project was funded by powerful people, parents who lost children, who would pay anything for a second chance. We helped them. We gave them hope." "You gave them lies," Claire said. "You took advantage of their grief to feed your twisted experiment. And when anyone threatened to expose you, they had accidents, just like you tried to do to me." "The board handled security," Sarah whispered. I didn't know they would." "But you knew what happened to the children who failed the program," Claire pressed. "The ones who couldn't be perfect mirrors. Where are they, Sarah?" Sarah's face went blank, her eyes glazing over. "They were defective. The board said they had to be eliminated to protect the project. It was all for the greater good, for science." The officer holding her arm started leading her toward the door. Sarah went quietly until she passed Michael. Then she stopped, turning to look at him one last time. "I never stopped loving you," she said softly. "Everything I did was to help you heal, to give you back what you lost. Can't you see that?" Michael looked at her. really looked at her and saw a stranger. The woman he had loved, the mother of his child, was gone. In her place was someone he didn't recognize, someone capable of unspeakable cruelty in the name of science and progress. "The only thing I see," he said quietly, "is that you killed our son twice, once with your project and again with your lies." After the police left with Sarah, the apartment fell into a heavy silence. Michael stood at the window, watching the patrol car's lights disappear into the rainy night. Behind him, Claire held Ethan close, her scarred hands trembling slightly as they stroked his hair. "I spent 5 years gathering evidence," Claire said quietly, breaking the silence. 5 years of hiding, watching, documenting everything. I couldn't move against them until I was sure I had enough proof to bring down the entire project. There were so many children involved, so many families who deserved to know the truth. Michael turned from the window. "How did you survive the crash?" Claire's hand unconsciously touched the scars on her face. "A truck driver found me on the side of the road. I was barely alive, unrecognizable. The hospital listed me as a Jane Doe. When I finally regained consciousness weeks later, I learned that Sarah had already reported me dead, had Ethan placed in the system." "But you've been watching him," Michael said. "It wasn't a question. From a distance. I couldn't risk getting too close. Not until I had enough evidence. The board, they have people everywhere. If they had known I survived." She pulled Ethan closer. "I couldn't risk losing him again." Ethan looked up at his mother, his young face filled with a mixture of love and pain. "I remembered you, even when they told me not to, even when Sarah tried to make me forget. I knew you were out there." Michael watched them, feeling like an intruder in his own apartment. The sight of them together made his chest ache with thoughts of Matthew. Not the Matthew from Sarah's twisted experiments, but his real son. The boy who had loved soccer and comic books, who had laughed at terrible jokes and fallen asleep reading under the covers with a flashlight. "The other children," he said finally, "the ones still in the program, what happens to them now?" Claire reached into her coat and pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's here. Locations of all the facilities, records of every child involved, financial transactions linking board members to the project. The police have copies, and I sent backups to several journalists. By morning, it will all be public." "There will be investigations," Michael said, his business mind already working. "Trials. The children will need support, counseling, their families. The ones who have families to go back to," Claire added softly. "Some of them, like Ethan, were taken from their parents through manufactured accidents. Others were actually orphans, but they deserve to know the truth about what was done to them." Michael walked to his desk and pulled out his laptop. "I have resources, connections. I can help make sure they're taken care of, that they get whatever support they need." "Why would you help?" Ethan asked suddenly. "After everything that happened?" Michael looked at the boy, really looked at him. Yes, there were similarities to Matthew, but now he could see Ethan clearly as his own person. A brave, resilient child who had survived unimaginable trauma. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because no child should have to go through what you did." Claire nodded slowly. "There's something else you should know about the night of the accident." She hesitated, looking at Ethan. "Maybe you should wait in the other room, sweetheart." But Ethan shook his head. "No more secrets. I want to know everything." Claire took a deep breath. "Sarah didn't just send security to stop us that night. She was there herself. I saw her car following us. When we crashed, I was only half conscious, but I saw her approach your car, Michael. She saw that Matthew was hurt, but instead of calling for help immediately..." Michael felt his knees go weak. "What are you saying?" She waited. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "I heard her on the phone with someone. She said it was the perfect opportunity, that now they would have real grief responses to study. She waited almost 15 minutes before calling 911. Michael stumbled back until he hit the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor. The implications of what Claire was saying were too horrific to process. Sarah hadn't just failed to prevent Matthew's death, she had seen it as an opportunity for her research. "The recordings," Ethan said suddenly, "the ones she made us watch of Matthew. They weren't just from before. She kept recording, even in the hospital. She made us study how you reacted when he died." The sound that came from Michael's throat wasn't quite human. It was the sound of a father learning that his son's last moments had been turned into research data, that his grief had been measured and analyzed like a laboratory experiment. Through his tears, he became aware of a small hand taking his. Ethan had crossed the room and sat down beside him, offering silent comfort with a wisdom far beyond his years. "I used to hate that I looked like him," Ethan said quietly, "that Sarah tried to make me be him. But maybe it means I can help you remember him the right way, not as an experiment, but as your son." For the first time since the night began, Michael felt something other than pain and rage. Looking at Ethan, he saw not a mirror of his lost son, but a child who had survived his own tragedy and emerged with his humanity intact. The rain had finally stopped outside, and the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky. None of them had slept, but there was still so much to do. So many children to save, so many families to notify, so much truth to uncover. But first, Michael had a promise to keep, not to Sarah's twisted vision of healing, but to the simple truth that every child deserves to be loved for who they are, not who someone wants them to be. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. The morning newspapers had exploded with headlines about Project Mirror, sending shockwaves through the medical and scientific communities. The investigations had uncovered even more than Claire's evidence had suggested. Dozens of facilities across the country, hundreds of children affected over the years. Michael stood in his office at Johnson Enterprises, but it was different now. The walls that had once held business awards now displayed artwork, drawings and paintings created by children in the recovery program he had established. The foundation, named in Matthew's memory, was dedicated to helping the survivors of Project Mirror and their families heal. He picked up a framed photograph from his desk, not the old family photo that had haunted him for years, but a new one. In it, he stood with Claire and Ethan at the opening of the Foundation's first trauma recovery center. The boy was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes, not the practiced one Sarah had tried to force him to copy from old videos of Matthew. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Claire entered, her scars less prominent now after reconstructive surgery, but still visible, a reminder of everything they had survived. "The last of the facilities has been shut down," she reported, sitting in one of the chairs across from his desk. "The board members are all in custody or cooperating with prosecutors. Sarah's trial starts next month." Michael nodded, setting down the photograph. "How are the children adjusting?" "Better than anyone expected. The therapy programs are helping. Having each other helps too. They understand what they've been through in a way no one else can." Claire paused, then added softly, "Ethan's nightmares are less frequent now." "And yours?" She gave him a small, sad smile. "Getting better. The support group for the parents. It helps, being able to talk about it with others who understand." The support group had been Michael's idea, a place where parents who had lost children and parents whose children had been used in the project could come together, share their grief, and help each other heal. It wasn't easy, but it was real, honest healing, not the artificial mirrors Sarah had tried to create. "The board approved the expansion plans," Michael said, changing the subject. "We can open 2 more recovery centers by the end of the year." And the scholarship fund for the children is fully funded. You didn't have to do all this, Claire said, though they'd had this conversation before. Yes, I did. Michael stood and walked to the window. Not out of guilt, though God knows I feel guilty for not seeing what Sarah was doing sooner, but because these children deserve a chance to be themselves, to heal and grow without anyone trying to make them into something they're not. A commotion in the outer office drew their attention. Ethan burst through the door, his backpack still on, excitement clear on his face. "Mom, Michael, I got an A on my science project." He waved a paper proudly. "And Mrs. Henderson says I can join the chess club if I want to." Claire beamed at her son. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. The real chess club this time, not the observation sessions," Ethan finished, his smile dimming slightly before brightening again. Real chess, with real kids who just like playing chess. Michael felt his throat tighten. This was what recovery looked like. Small steps, normal achievements, the freedom to be just another kid interested in just another after-school activity. "We should celebrate," he said. "How about pizza at that place you like?" Ethan's face lit up, but then he looked thoughtful. "Can we invite Tommy? He had his first real therapy session today, and his dad says he's having a hard time." Tommy was another survivor of Project Mirror, one of the younger ones. His father had lost his daughter to cancer and had been deceived into believing Tommy was a perfect match. When the truth came out, both father and son had been devastated. They were healing now, slowly learning to build a real relationship based on who they actually were, not who anyone had tried to make them be. "Of course we can invite them," Claire said, sharing a proud look with Michael. This was Ethan, not a mirror, not a replacement, but a compassionate boy who had survived trauma and wanted to help others do the same. Later that evening, as Michael watched Ethan teaching Tommy how to properly fold a pizza slice, "It's all about the angle," he explained seriously. He felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. Not the false peace Sarah had tried to manufacture through her twisted experiments, but the real, messy, imperfect peace that comes from accepting truth and choosing to move forward. Matthew would always be a part of him, a precious memory held in his heart. But standing here now, watching Ethan be simply and beautifully himself, Michael knew that true healing didn't come from trying to recreate the past. It came from embracing the present, from allowing love to grow in new and unexpected ways. The foundation would continue its work. There were more children to help, more families to support, more healing to facilitate. But looking at Ethan, laughing, living, thriving, Michael knew that Sarah had been wrong about one fundamental thing: you couldn't mirror a soul. Each child was uniquely, perfectly themselves, and that was exactly as it should be. As if reading his thoughts, Ethan looked up and caught his eye. The boy's smile, his own smile, not a copied one, warmed something in Michael's heart. This wasn't an ending so much as a new beginning for all of them. And for the first time in years, Michael was ready to see where this path might lead.